Wisdom and Wellness family. My name is Mpoomy and welcome to another episode. Today, we are diving into a crucial topic that in my case, I've rarely heard or is rarely discussed. And we are raising awareness on osteoporosis. And I'm joined by three incredible guests who bring a wealth of knowledge backed by their personal experiences to our conversation. First up, we have Tereza. She is the CEO of the National Osteoporosis Foundation South Africa, and she has over 35 years of experience and she advocates for the patients. Then we have Mr. Paul Miller, the CEO of Cipla South Africa, who has extensive experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and he will be sharing Cipla's involvement in raising awareness and also providing solutions. And lastly, she will join us shortly. We have Laura Wagner-Meyer. She's a model, a fashion designer, and motivational speaker who has shared her journey of living with disability. Hello, Paul. Hello, Tereza.
Hello, Mpoomy.
Good afternoon.
How are you guys?
Very well, thanks.
Pleased to be here.
I think let's kickstart our conversation. Tereza, before we go even further, can you give us a clear definition of what osteoporosis is and why it's so important to raise awareness?
Osteoporosis, so exactly what that is, it means that your bones become porous. Osteo means bone, porous means porous bones. So if your bones become porous, they obviously are much easier to fracture. So that's what osteoporosis is.
Yeah.
It affects about 1 in 3 women, 1 in 5 men. So it's not only women who get this, and it's not only old people who get this. I think that is why we're focusing today on a much younger age group, just to make them more aware about osteoporosis.
Sure. And before we even move on to Paul, why does it affect more women than it does men?
Well, it doesn't look like that, but we are born smaller than men sometimes. We have smaller bone structures. They have they have more bone than us. And later on, we become fatter than them, they say. But it's because we have a tinier bone structure. So we start off with less bone.
Got you. And Paul, what is Cipla's role in supporting the National Osteoporosis Foundation? And why is this partnership so important?
I think the reality is that all of us are going to age. And the hard reality of that is with aging, you get cognitive decline, you lose muscle mass, and also you lose bone mass. And I think the message from Cipla is that there's something you can do about it. It doesn't mean that it's inevitable, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a way forward to make a difference. And so Cipla, we really want to raise the awareness of bone importance and bone strength, and most importantly, that you can do something about it, that even while you're young, between the ages of 20 and 30, you can build bone mass. I think this is exciting. It's something we can do in our youth to really determine a long-term outcome.
Paul, thank you so much for sharing about your collaboration with Tereza and the National Foundation. I think we're going to have Laura join us next, who's going to share her personal story of living with disability and what risks are involved. You have shared your journey, and I was going through your Instagram and I was stalking you, and I found a post, I think from like 2016, where you were saying you didn't want to be the advocate for disability because you didn't want to be sidelined. But here you are, you're a model, you're in fashion, and a motivational speaker. So how did that come about?
So I think as much as I try to avoid it, the more I was getting gravitated and pulled towards it. I've realized that I've got a responsibility as somebody who's getting to, live this unique experience, that I have to advocate for others. They don't have the same access to the same experience that I do. They might have very different upbringings, different disabilities that limit them differently. But here I am, incredibly mobile and able to access absolutely any space. And I feel that it's really important to be able to show up, not just for myself, but for those who might not be able to. So that swayed my decision. The more I thought, let me be in the sidelines, let me remain in the background. It was like, no, you can't always be you can't create change from that sideline. You have to be forefront and leading it.
And I think in the beginning, I mean, I didn't go. Some of the posts were you don't have all of the posts, but I think if you can correct me if I'm wrong, you used to just share from above and not your full body, right? So when you were doing that, was it a way of hiding or just keeping yourself safe so that you can enjoy the platform like everybody else does? What was the intention behind that?
That was exactly it, the latter. Like, I was so scared of being victimized and opening myself up
Yeah,
to all sorts of trolls and comments just because of the way that I look. And it was almost a safe space, especially when I was in my teenage years. We all got into Instagram when we were, 15, 16, and it's such a crucial time. And I
yeah,
grew up around, a very protective community. And that was their advice as well. It was like, come join us on the platform, interact with us, but we want you to be safe too. So that was a decision I made back then. And I think the first post that is there was actually around 2016, 2017. And that was the first time I showed my full body after like 2 years on
yeah,
Instagram. And it was
sure.
absolutely revolutionary. People were like, whoa, is
Yeah.
this Laura? It was such a cool moment, even though I had been hidden all that time.
Did you feel liberated, or was there feelings of, oh, I shouldn't have done this, I'm oversharing?
No, not at all. I felt incredibly liberated. I come from a
Yeah,
family where, you always have to just be bold and show up. And once you're there, there's
yeah,
no going back. So you have to just own it. So
yeah.
I loved it. I leaned into it a lot more since then. And it just made me feel empowered more than anything.
I love that. So Teresa, can you give us an overview of the work that you do with the foundation, and also how this collaboration with Cipla has come about?
Okay, well, I listened to you saying that you didn't even know what osteoporosis was. So I
Yeah.
was just thinking, I haven't been doing my job. And
No, it's my fault.
I haven't been doing my job, and we haven't. But it's also, I think, well, the foundation is now 30 years old, as I mentioned before. We're the only foundation in South Africa that really addresses the issue of osteoporosis, but also other bone diseases. But
Mm,
is our main focus. And I think, but also just thinking about what you said, is I think people, when they hear the word osteoporosis, it goes over their heads because it's not something associated with younger people. And this
yeah.
is the campaign that we are so grateful to Cipla for, because we're focusing on the younger generation, 25 to 35 years old. And as Paul explained, you're putting or wanted to explain, I think, is what we're focusing on is when you're in your 20s to 30s, you start planning for your old age. You're putting
Mm,
away money. You buy policies. You do everything to save money so that you have um, enough money when you retire one day. And you have to have the same mindset about putting bone into your bone bank, and it
sure.
doesn't really only start now, it starts at birth, that you need to
Mm,
adopt a lifestyle of putting bone in your bone bank. Because if you think of this is your skeleton, it protects
yeah.
everything else. So if it's like maintaining a house, if you don't maintain it, everything is going to fall to
Fall
pieces.
apart. Yeah.
So the campaign is really, I'm so excited about this, because now I think the concept of putting bone in your bone bank, as if you're putting money into your money bank, that concept needs to hold true, because bone is a living
Yeah.
tissue, and you build bone until you're about 25 to 30 years old. After
Sure.
that, everyone starts losing bone at a steady rate. And so the more
Sure.
bone you have in your bone bank, the more you have to lose. And the less you have, the less you have to lose. So
Hmm.
you've got to do everything in your power to really charge your bone bank,
Yeah.
as is you charging your money bank.
I think we're going to get into what that actually looks like in practical terms. But you're so right in saying at this age, I mean, I just turned 30, but my retirement is in place. I'm taking care of the rest of my body. We take care of what we eat, the kids, and all of that. But never did I once think I have to bank on my bones. Like I have to take care of that. So we'll get back into what that looks like in practical terms. But Laura, back to you. How has disability, living with disability, impacted your career, your relationships, friendships, dating? I mean, for like, I think of something as simple as going to my friends and saying, hey, let's go ice skating. What does that mean for you? Or even in dating, how has that impacted you?
So, to be very honest, I actually haven't necessarily let it impact my life. If
Okay.
anything, the impact comes from society as a whole. It's the people saying, oh no, how are you going to navigate relationships? Oh no, how are you going to do this? And I tell them the same thing. We're just going to figure it out as we go along. So
Okay.
that's my approach to everything, to those activities, like you said, ice skating. I'll go with my friends and maybe sit on the sidelines, and I'll have a little rotation where someone will come sit with me in between. Like they've just found a way of integrating me into all of those kinds of activities. So I've never been fully left out or even allowed myself to be left out or limited by that. And even on the relationship front, I am who I am. And I'll always, the partner for me, or the people that gravitate towards me, are the ones who see that as well. And they also don't limit me. They lean into who Laura is.
Yeah. And I mean, you have such a positive outlook on life. I was just going through your social media. You're very positive, a lot of confidence. But I also know that specifically in the Black community, growing up, kids with disability were mostly hidden, not necessarily hidden, but kept at home and kept in the room because the parents were trying to protect them. So, what is different about the way you were raised and the community and the people that you're surrounded by that has allowed you to fully be yourself and be confident?
Yeah, I think that's something that's fueled all the work that I've done. It's because I'm aware of
Mm.
those who haven't had those opportunities and they don't have that support. And I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to have a family that decided from very early on, we're going to support you in whatever you do, any endeavor. You're not allowed to just give up. My mom was
Sure.
very hard on me. She was like, you're going to try everything and anything under the sun. You're not allowed to just not do it without even trying first. You're like everybody else. We're going to treat you like everybody else. And I've got a twin sister, and she's completely able-bodied. And Emma was my benchmark for life. Whatever she did, I wanted to do as well.
Wow.
So I always had
Sure.
that kind of inspiration to keep going, and my family behind me and supporting me. And that is the reason why I'm so confident. It bled out into my community, East London as a whole. Like, the entire community supports and encourages me as the individual. They don't try and limit me. They encourage absolutely everything I do, because they've seen those examples from my mom and my sister and my family. And it's
Yeah.
plays such a crucial role in my overall upbringing, my confidence. I honestly feel like I am unstoppable because I know I've got this community behind me. Even if
Sure.
naturally you'll have those bad days, but you get over them because you have that support right behind you. So it does make me really sad when people don't have access to that. And again, it just fuels my work and keeps me
Yeah.
going.
I love that you mentioned like your mom saying you just like everybody else and treating you as such. And I think that's important even for young moms and children to know that you're just like everybody else, and also using your sister as a benchmark. And when you talk about her, you smiling again. Exactly, I was about to say when you talk about her, you're smiling, and it just really stamps and speaks on the people we're surrounded by and how the life that they speak into us. But you are considered a high risk for developing osteoporosis. What steps are you taking to manage the risk?
So I think before this, like Teresa mentioned, we aren't necessarily aware fully aware of the concept of osteoporosis. I didn't really know what it meant to be at risk of it as well until
Yeah.
recently. It's something that was always at the back of my mind. Like, naturally, with the disability that I have, my bone structure is a little bit more fragile than most, and I am prone to risk factors. So I mean, the little bits that I do in the background was making sure I'm exercising often, making sure I'm taking my calcium supplements. But beyond that, I actually wasn't doing much. I was telling Teresa
Mm.
also earlier, like, I now need to go back and do more. It completely opened my mind to the fact that we have this opportunity now, and we actually have to just dive in and do as much as we can while we still are young and fit and trying to build up that bone mass. But up until now, I hadn't been as active as what I should have been.
That's honest. You're as honest as I am. Teresa, and I want to touch on, you mentioned it earlier, but the campaign is called Bank on Your Bones, like you bank on your finances. What does that mean, bank on your bones? How do we bank on our bones on a practical level, and why the comparison to our finances?
Well, okay, so bank on your bones. You bank on your bones every day to just get around, to walk. So if you have bad bones, you can't do that. So the concept is to put as much bone into your bone bank so that you can keep on banking on them, I think, until you die. And
Yeah.
and that's the whole concept of it. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not something that starts today, although it's never too early or too late to start looking after your bones. But this is a lifelong process. It needs to start when you're very young, and it ends the day you die, because that's the only day your bones die. So
Yeah.
this time period, as I also said, you have until about 25 to 30 years to put as much bone in that bone bank as possible. And by doing that, and how you're doing that, I don't want to know whether you want to discuss that now.
Yes, please. What does it actually mean?
What does it mean? So it means that you've got to listen to your mom and your grandma and say, eat your veggies, drink your milk, do all those good things. So
Yeah.
diet extremely important. So what we say or recommend is a dairy intake, or not a dairy, but a calcium intake of about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day. So everyone wants to know, so what does that mean? Well, if you're a
Mm-hmm.
vegetarian and you don't drink milk, you're probably going to need to eat about 2 kilos of broccoli per day to get to that calcium.
Sure.
But if you take your dairy, it's about 3 portions of dairy. So a cup of milk, a cup of unflavored yogurt, and a portion of
Yeah.
cheese split throughout the day will get more or less get you to your calcium intake.
Yeah.
And obviously vitamin D, extremely important, because if you don't have
Mm.
enough vitamin D on board, you can't absorb your calcium. We sit in
Mm.
offices from 9 to 5, so we don't get in the sun. If we do
Yeah.
get in the sun, everyone says wear a sunblock. So every factor over factor 7, it totally blocks out the synthesis of vitamin D in your skin, because sun is your biggest um, um, maker of vitamin D. You make it in your skin, and it
Mm.
changes to a hormone in your body, and that's where it becomes important for your calcium absorption. The
Sure.
darker your skin is, the longer you need to spend in the sun. So me with my pale skin, I have to spend 20 minutes, but you with a darker skin might need to spend 30 minutes in the sun to get the same effect. So now we're not saying go out there and tan. Is try and spend some time in the sun before 11 o'clock in the morning, or after 3 o'clock, because those are between that is the danger zone. We have religions where they cover up totally so they don't get
Mm.
sun exposure. We have um, pollution in our cities. I've been to Beijing a few weeks ago. I mean, there they don't make any vitamin D because the smog is just so bad. There's no sun exposure. So there are various things that impact your vitamin D intake. So um, most of the calcium supplements out there also have their vitamin D on board so that it gets absorbed. Exercise, extremely important. And
Yeah.
we're talking about weight bearing exercise. And I spoke to Laura earlier about how active is she, because she does use crutches, and she can't do a marathon. And she's already getting some damage to her joints because of the crutches. So
Mm.
she doesn't only have the disability as a risk factor. There are various other mechanical things that she goes through that are risk factors for developing osteoporosis. You also need to do muscle strengthening exercise because you need to protect your core, and this is also very important in Laura's case. Um,
Yeah.
if you smoke, stop smoking, because smoking is not sexy anymore. Even vaping is not sexy anymore. And the reason for
Yeah.
that is it impacts the hormones. In women, it suppresses our estrogen hormone, which is our bone protective hormone. In men, it
Mm.
suppresses testosterone. And just tell a man that he doesn't have any testosterone, he will stop smoking immediately.
Yeah.
But those are the things. And alcohol. We live in a
Yeah.
country where rifles and rugby and sunny skies and all those beers and brandy and coke is very, very popular. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying don't drink, but if you drink more than three alcoholic drinks per day, that is puts you at risk for developing osteoporosis, because too much alcohol is bad for your bones. It just is not good for your bones. I won't go into the technical detail here.
You know what's my favorite part of how you've just broken everything down? One, I feel like I have been banking on my bones, because you've literally just mentioned lifestyle choices, which is eating
Mm.
well, getting getting in nature, getting some sunlight, and exercising, moving our bodies, and obviously avoiding your alcohol and your smoking, which is what we always speak about in Wisdom and Wellness, as we stand for holistic health. And if we've been doing that, we've been unknowingly banking on our bones, before we even get to the supplements, part. So I'm so glad you shared that. And I think it puts such a big emphasis. In fact, it goes back to how we grew up. I always think back on how we grew up. We woke up, we would play outside, we would play in the sun, we would eat a rainbow plate, a home cooked meal, which is healthy. We ran around and we were healthier. But now, I think society, as we grow older, like you said, we're sitting in offices all day, we're ordering takeouts, and it's really limiting our lifestyles. But I'm so glad you shared that. um let's get back into some common risk factors that our listeners can look out for, that could be signs of osteoporosis.
You know, the one thing is we call osteoporosis the silent disease. So you don't see whether you have osteoporosis. You can't see your
Yeah,
bones becoming thinner. It's almost like having a high cholesterol. And the first
sure.
sign of a high cholesterol is a heart attack. And
Mm,
in osteoporosis, it's similar. The first sign usually is a fracture, and that is when you've really lost a lot of bone. So you can't see it. So lifestyle, and I think most of our chronic diseases are so focused on lifestyle, and it remains important for all of them.
for everything.
But there are risk factors other than lifestyle that is makes you develop osteoporosis. So I'm going to mention a few of them.
Hmm.
Obviously, if you're on something like cortisone or glucocorticoids for a long-term disease like a lung disease or rheumatoid arthritis, long-term use of cortisone bad for your bones.
Hmm.
If you have any malignancies, um, the treatment, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, bad for your bones. And remember, breast cancer doesn't occur in older people. It's in our younger
Yeah,
populations,
younger
also
people.
very, very rife. So the malignancies. Then there are endocrine diseases, and the endocrine diseases affecting your thyroid. If you have an overactive thyroid, it can lead to osteoporosis. If you have overactive parathyroids, those glands sitting behind that regulates your calcium metabolism, they can actually, if they're overactive, they start leaching calcium from the bones and you start getting osteoporosis.
Sure.
AIDS in this country, HIV, very important risk factor. Diabetes, of which we have a myriad of people
Yeah.
suffering from diabetes, and it's not only type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is related to the obesity problem we have in this country. So
Mm.
if you listen carefully, you see everything lifestyle is
Lifestyle
the life
related.
the healthy lifestyle is so important for all of them.
You mentioned that it's a silent disease, almost like cholesterol, and how you find out is it starts with a heart attack. And even osteoporosis, you mentioned a sign could be a fractured bone. I think I've met a lot of people who've had a fractured bone, but not one of them mentioned possibly having osteoporosis. Do you get a diagnosis? Do you go to a doctor? Is there a specific test that has to be done? How do you know? And also, once you get the diagnosis, is it reversible, or is it this is what you're living with?
Because we're specifically targeting a younger age group. Remember, in
Yeah.
this country, medical aids don't cover osteoporosis because it's not a prescribed minimum benefit. So if you need to be on the very high end plan before they will even start paying for the diagnosis, which is a DEXA X-ray or a DEXA scan. So I'm not going to talk about that specifically now. So osteoporosis is a silent disease. And you've mentioned people fracturing that Usually we say that a non-traumatic fracture that leads to you need to go for surgery or whatever bone you're fracturing after minimum trauma, that is possibly due to a low bone density or osteoporosis.
Okay.
So in older people, we say if you fall from a standing height and you break something, you probably have osteoporosis.
Sure.
In younger kids, because we've seen many children with osteoporosis as well. So low trauma fractures is probably a sign that your bone density needs to be investigated.
Okay.
So those are the risk factors I mentioned. If you under 50 and you have those risk factors present, I think that is your duty, because I think the onus becomes more and more on the patient itself to present yourself to the doctor and say, listen, I've heard Mpoomy's podcast and I've read about Laura. I have these risk factors, so I might be at risk for developing osteoporosis. Forgot to mention that family history is a very, very important risk factor.
I love that you keep mentioning the core. I always look at the core as the gut. It's
Yes.
literally the center of everything. If you have a strong core, your whole body feels strong. If you have a good gut,
Yeah.
then the whole
You've got a
body
good posture and
functions.
everything. So really, because once you sit up, and I do lots of Pilates, once you sit up and I can actually feel the little muscles between my vertebrae engaging.
Yeah.
Just by doing a simple move like that.
Yeah, yeah. Laura, what changes do you think are still necessary in the media industry and just I think in many other industries when it comes to inclusion and disability? Because I think there is a lot of ignorance. There's questions that we are scared to ask. I think because we don't want to be offensive. And yeah, what do you what work do you think is still necessary?
I think the biggest thing is probably needing to include more people with disabilities in those decisions. You know,
Yeah.
it's you've got questions because you're not present. You know, we aren't present to answer your questions in the process. We get brought in at the
Sure.
very end where we can't
Sure.
actually contribute to change. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest one, especially in fashion. We've got amazing collections coming out that are adaptive, but they haven't necessarily included a person living with a disability to actually test the garment or give contributions to the design of it. Same for
Yeah.
buildings and accessibility. Places that are supposed to be accessible aren't because they haven't consulted somebody with a disability.
Someone.
So I think
Sure.
the biggest thing is just to include us more. Having
Yeah.
those discussions are important. I said earlier, society is what limits me more than anything, and it's because of that lack of education. It's because of people not knowing how to interact with people with
Yeah.
disabilities. You get intrusive questions that are really painful sometimes, but
Yeah.
you have to just understand it's because there's no education and
Mm.
there's no visibility on disability, especially at these high levels. So it's nice that like in a campaign like this we're being brought in early as we're going to experience the process. We're not just being brought in at the end.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I must ask, a few years ago, my daughter's 6 now. She's very inquisitive. At the time, I think she was 2 or 3, and we came across a man with a disability, and he was limping in the way that he walks. And in her innocence, she asked, "Mommy, why is he dancing?" And I could see the innocence in her question, but I didn't know how to answer her. And we want to answer our kids in an honest way, so that they can respect people who are different to them. But also, she's 2, 3.
Yeah.
How do we talk to our children about people who are different, people who are living with disability?
I think it's a very delicate balance because I'm aware that I'm incredibly open. I love when kids come up and ask me all of those intrusive thoughts, and I'll rein them in and say, okay, let's start from the top, and we'll
I'm not
unpack
dancing.
everything together. Exactly. I'm not necessarily dancing. I mean, you're right. I'm swaying a little bit, but not really dancing. This just helps
Yeah.
me explain to kids. I just use my crutches to keep me supported. Like your legs are doing for you, these are my legs. I just need extra help.
Mm,
And some people aren't as open, and I think that's something also to be mindful of, and
yeah.
respecting people's disabilities and their choice and in how they choose to share, is also a very big factor. If you can see that people are closed off, it's sometimes better to leave it off, and unless it's as simple as a question, if anything, being able
Mm,
to ask
mm.
them, do you mind if my child answers a question? She asked why you're walking in that way, and they'll tell you politely whether or not they want to engage. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's probably the first step. But I love it. I think my favorite interactions are when the parents come up to me and say, please just deal with this child. She's asking me too many questions. I don't know what
Yeah.
to do. And I love just taking the time and getting down to their level, quite literally sitting on the floor in the middle of spa and being like, this is why I do this.
This is what's happening.
And yeah, I love it. No, that part of it I love. I think especially at that young age, those
Yeah.
interactions for me personally I find important because as they're growing through life, they're going to have a very different perception of disability than what like a 42-year-old would have.
Mm.
I mean, I met a
Mm,
man a few years ago, again in his 40s. It was the very first time he'd met anyone with a disability. And I thought to
sure.
myself, wow,
Oh.
in 40 years, you've never
Where are
come
you
across a
living?
exactly. I was like, listen, I know we're in the middle of nowhere, but still, like, this is absolutely insane. And
Yeah.
he was just
Sure.
flabbergasted. He had all sorts of questions and he didn't know how to approach it. And I sat him down and said, you know what, let's just go from the top, and we
Let's talk
unpack
about
things.
it.
It's almost like it feels like a bit of a therapy session. It's like, how did that
Yeah.
make you feel?
Yeah.
And it is nice to unpack that and have him just express that, like, I've never experience somebody like you, but I want to understand and I don't know how to, but I'm trying.
I think that's vulnerability, and that's why I love conversations so much. And in him saying, and I'm speaking for him, but in him saying, I don't understand, but I want to, it also gives you room to be yourself. Because I think what makes it so hard, or what puts the barrier, is that I have fear, now you have fear. But as soon as I come and say, hey, this is my honest truth, I want to know and I want to do better. Then you get room to say, oh, okay, so this person has allowed me, gives me permission to be myself. And that's why conversations are so important, because they take away stigma. That's the only way we can eliminate stigma, and that's the only way we can live together and be fair and kind to each other, is if we actually talk about it. And that's why it was so important for me to say, how do I talk to my children? Because I don't want to not have any conversations with my child, and then at 40 they're shocked to see something different. But just before we close, I wanted to ask, you are in the fashion industry, and um, I listened to a guy talk, and he's a bit, he's tall and he's wide, and he was talking about how hard it is to buy clothes. And I've never had that issue. I go into a shop and I just pick a pair of pants and I leave. And so I've never ever had to think about, will I find clothes in a shop? But I can imagine in your experience there's a whole lot of adjusting that has to happen. So what does your shopping experience look like? What does clothing mean to you? Is it now a form of just, let me just cover up, or is it as exciting and for you as well?
So I think I noticed that gap, especially when again you're in your teenage years and you're trying to keep up with the trends like everybody else. And I would be sitting in the fitting rooms trying to like wear these crop tops or these outrageous things, and it just doesn't work for my body type. And
Yeah.
at 12, I was like, okay, shoot, this is going to be different for me. My sister can put absolutely anything on. She looks gorgeous and everything, and I've got
Yeah.
to just take a little bit of time. And I think I do have a challenging time shopping, and it's influenced the way that I dress. When I find something that works for me and I don't have to adjust it, I buy like 10 of it, because it's so
Sure.
hard to find. I entered fashion specifically because I didn't like that there's that gap. I didn't like the fact
Mm.
that I have to go and spend 2.5 hours to find a pair of pants, whereas someone else can go and within 15 minutes find a whole wardrobe.
Mm.
And it's 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 disheartening. It can be disheartening, but I think it also fuels that desire to make that change.
Yeah.
My vision is not to make, just fashion. I don't want it to just be on the body. I need fashion to work for me, and I want
Yeah.
that for other people, especially for people with disabilities. Like, your garment should be contributing to you, your personality. You shouldn't have to fit into what is around you. So it's a very big task, and it's something that I have to just plan for. If I know I need things, I have to literally start like a week before an event to start searching every other night, like a good 2 hours every evening, to just
Yeah.
find something perfect. But we've just found a way around it every time. I'm very lucky.
Yeah. Teresa, as we coming to a close again, what are common treatments for osteoporosis? Is there any new development, any new research that you can share?
You know what? I think lifestyle and all those things that we've already talked about, that remains
Yeah.
part of any treatment regime as well. In
Yeah.
this country, we have every available medication that is in the basket of osteoporosis care. The sad thing, it's not available to everyone because it's expensive,
Mm.
and people's medical aids don't pay for it.
Sure.
So I'm going to mention the molecules. 20 years ago, we started with bisphosphonates, and that is a drug that targets the bone chewing cells because we've got bone chewing and bone building cells. So the bone process is that if your chewing cells, if that whole process becomes uncoupled and unbalanced, and the chewing cells work too quickly, you need to do something to stop them. So the
Mm.
bisphosphonates target that. Then we in our menopause, and this is, remember when we go through the menopause, that is the time period 5 to 10 years, 5 years after the menopause occurred, usually at around about the age of 50, and you are
Yeah.
baby still, so you're not thinking about that. That's the most rapid loss of bone that you can experience if it's not
Sure.
treated with hormone replacement therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So hormone replacement therapy, a good treatment for postmenopausal osteoporosis prevention and also treatment. It's not suitable for everyone. Calcium
Okay.
and vitamin D obviously remains there. Then we've got things like teriparatide or parathyroid hormone, the hormone I talked about just now that can work too much and you start
Yeah.
leaching bone. It's a treatment that we can do for about 18 months because it's extremely expensive. Um, but it's probably the most effective way to build bone in someone who has almost no bone left and who has fracturing osteoporosis. So
Yeah.
we've got all them. We've got something called the denosumab. I can get very technical here, but I'm not going to. We call the anti-rank ligands, but I was just suffice to say that we have
There's
all the
options.
treatments available, and
There's options.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's a bad thing, and that's what I'm fighting for. I've been fighting for.
Yeah.
When I started with the foundation, I thought, oh, it's going to take me a few years. I had stars in my eyes. Medical aids are just going to come to the party, and no. 30 years on,
Mm.
I'm still struggling to do that. So I need beautiful people like you to help us make a noise about this disease and just to
Okay.
say that it's out there and it can affect everyone, not
Yeah.
only little old white ladies, all women and
All
men in
people.
our country. We are
Yeah.
all susceptible to osteoporosis,
Thank you. And I
but
hope
it's
this
never
conversation,
too early or too
yeah,
late.
it's never too
And
late
you
or
can't,
early.
what I wanted to say with osteoporosis treatment, the whole aim of osteoporosis treatment is to really protect your underlying bone from future fractures. It's never ever going to push your bone density up there it was when you were in your teens, in your late 20s. Never
Yeah.
going to do that, but it's going to protect your bones against fractures.
Thank you. I think that last sentence simplified it and summarized it well. And Laura, any last words to encourage young people living with disability who might feel the need to hide, who aren't on Instagram, who are shy to put themselves out there, and what words do you have for them, teenagers or even mothers who have young ones who feel like hiding?
So I always say that you can't necessarily choose the body that you were born into, but you get to choose how
Sure.
you'd like to feel in it. And I think that works
Oh,
across the board for everybody. You have
Mm.
to really just go out and do whatever you feel is right for you. No one
yeah.
else can say anything. Society can't limit you. Your peers cannot limit you. As long as you decide that you can and you will, you are absolutely unstoppable.
I think that was for everyone. You don't choose the body you're born in, but you get to decide. You get to decide how you live your life. Thank you so much, ladies. This was such an informative conversation, and I'm always big on lifestyle changes. I'm always big on how we eat, what we consume, and I loved, Teresa, that you mentioned that it's as simple as walking, daily walking, because I think we like looking for other bigger options, but it first starts with the simple things like walking, what we eat, how what we consume. And last question, Teresa, to end off, what impact do you hope that this conversation and your partnership with Cipla will have on osteoporosis?
I think the whole just busting the myth that this is just an old person's disease,
Mm,
that everyone can get it, that even if you have a beautiful face like Laura, you can also have osteoporosis.
mm,
It's not something you can read on the outside, it's on the inside, and that it's never too early or too late to start looking after your bones.
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much to Cipla for bringing this conversation forth. And like you said, Teresa, I hope that this will help us even with medical aids and the conversation, and also help us change our lifestyles for the better. Thank you so much, Wisdom and Wellness family. I hope that this conversation will spread and that you share it with everyone. And you're never too young and you're never too old.